that this image has been illustrated so it can portray how hierarchies may exist in South Asian communities. And again, as Helen has highlighted, it's important to highlight that caste-based discrimination is not limited to South Asian communities. It does affect people across multiple regions and diasporas. And I think Helen listed quite a few different countries and diaspora and communities, for example, in the UK, US and Canada, East Asia communities, the likes of Japan and Korea, and in Africa in places like Nigeria, Senegal and Ethiopia. I will be aware that a lot of you will know what racism is, and racism involves harmful treatment of discriminatory practice against individuals based on their race, and often continued by a belief in the supremacy of one race over another. Racist biases has historically affected various global majorities, including South Asians in the UK. However, in contrast, casteism refers to discrimination based on caste, a traditional system of social stratification in South Asia. This hierarchical separation includes the dehumanization of lower castes, often known as Dalits and untouchables, and this does maintain and exacerbate social manipulation and violence. Both forms of discrimination involve a hierarchical thinking and systemic inequities that arise from different cultural and social constructs. Let me just give you a little bit of a background how I came across casteism. I did attend a National Black Members Conference last year. Although I knew this form of discrimination existed in the Eastern world, I was not aware how it was impacting society in the United Kingdom and social work as a practice. I felt passionately about exploring the complex interplay between racism, casteism, and various forms of discrimination and the implications on social work. In England, these issues are particularly relevant with South Asian communities where traditional caste distinctions persist and intersect with racial prejudice. During my time at the National Black Members Conference, I was abruptly made aware casteism was impacting society in the United Kingdom by an example that was shared by a COVID nurse who spoke about his lived experience of casteism. This individual was keen for me to share his experience to support learning. However, to protect his identity, I'm going to call this nurse Govind. So Govind shared that he left India due to discrimination and social injustice he was experiencing. This was in relation to the social positioning because of the family he was born into. He shared his surname carried connotations for his position in society. Govind worked hard to be educated and become a nurse, and to enhance his life chances, he emigrated to work as a nurse in the United Kingdom. He worked hard and climbed a professional ladder. During 2020, Govind nominated himself to work as a COVID nurse. He shared helping people during a time of need was core to his values, and this is what he loved most about his job. However, this quickly changed when he was working on the front line during the pandemic. He experienced that when a South Asian woman had come to be vaccinated, she actually refused to be vaccinated by him. When he explored the reasons behind this, she was openly vocal. His surname on his ID badge indicated he was from a lower caste and he was not desirable or worthy to vaccinate her, and she demanded she was vaccinated by another nurse. Govind shared this immediately made him feel ashamed, de-skilled, isolated, helpless and sad that he had still not escaped discrimination due to his caste. He shared his inherited status to this day determines his social acceptance in society. So this got me thinking in relation to my own role as a social worker. I may have explored racism with global majority families, but did I really zoom in and give attention to caste? And how was this actually impacting individuals I supported? I wondered how this may be impacting our participants in practice. And do we as Frontline and the local authority create a platform to discuss these experiences? I wondered if we were teaching our participants to explore the lived experiences of the families in relation to their caste, to get a deeper understanding of the world and their experiences. I felt this was imperative to create a platform and bring awareness to the team and complex interplay between racism, casteism, and various discriminations and forms of harm this was causing and the implications on social work. So in England, I am aware these issues are particularly relevant with global majority communities where traditional caste differences persist and intersect with racial biases. So I just want to leave you with that, just to give a bit of context on how this came to my attention and the attention of Frontline. I'm now going to hand over to Helen.
So just listening then to Chaz's description of one particular person's experience, I'm wondering, I suppose, what reflections we're holding as social workers, what things we're starting to think about. We want to give you a bit of space to just hold some of those thoughts. So we're offering a couple of reflective type questions to sit with just for a minute. So I'd like you to think about, what are the possible impacts of casteism in the UK? What does this mean for the children and families we work with? What does this mean for our social work practice? And also to think, have you seen the impact of caste discrimination in your community, in your work? So I'm just going to speak for a moment around casteism in the UK and to share some messages from research. Research indicates that caste-based discrimination continues to affect South Asians in England, in the UK, impacting areas such as education, employment and social interactions. And this can often overlap with racist bias, as Chaz was describing, leading to a compounding of discrimination. We know that casteism is present within South Asian diaspora communities. This is often unreported and socially silenced. It's not something that is explicitly recognised under the Equality Act 2010, which we can think may lead to some of the lack of knowledge, the lack of training, the lack of awareness in this area. But we know that there are reports of workplace harassment, educational discrimination and service exclusion. So thinking about education in particular, we hear that Dalit students face bullying and exclusion in schools. A study in Leicester highlighted incidents where lower caste students were subject to derogatory remarks and social exclusion. Thinking in the sphere of employment, lower caste individuals have encountered significant barriers in hiring and career advancement. Research by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research found that individuals with South Asian names had to send nearly twice as many job applications as their white counterparts to receive a callback. And then we think about the layers of difference and the layers of complexity in relation to caste system, and that makes us think again about the impact on particular individuals within that cohort as well. So thinking about social interactions, social gatherings and marriages often reflect caste considerations, reinforcing societal division and perpetuating separation of races. Okay, so I'm going to move us along and think about into this section of the session this morning to think about how we might go about identifying caste discrimination.
So the research shows strong evidence that caste-based discrimination is present within South Asian communities in the UK. Just for context, South Asians make up approximately 7.5% of England's population. That's according to the 2021 census. But the reports cited in this slide detail that caste discrimination was reported by respondents in several areas of life, including employment. So 45% of respondents reported workplace discrimination. This could look like a hiring bias. It could be workplace harassment, limited promotion opportunities. The report also detailed examples of discrimination in education, so bullying, exclusion of children from lower caste backgrounds, also discrimination in terms of public services. So people discriminatorily treated by service providers. Religious and community institutions also exclude, and that could be, for example, from temples or from leadership roles, and also discrimination in terms of social interaction, so social stigma, segregation in housing and social networks. And the research highlights that Dalits, or so-called untouchables, are the most affected group here. And they described instances of verbal abuse, name-calling, social exclusion, psychological harm and loss of dignity. And it's really important just to note the mental health impact of this. So the discrimination leads to significant mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. And the compounded stress from both casteism and racism can make individuals feel overwhelmed by the systemic biases that they encounter. These statistics are taken from studies done in 2009 and 2010. There hasn't been a recent large-scale government study. However, more recent policy reports, academic research consultations since then show the same continuing evidence of caste discrimination in the UK. So what's the impact of this on our work with families? So people may conceal their caste identity due to stigma and fear. So first of all, it's likely that we're not actually asking people about their caste, but even if we do, there's a chance that they might not want to openly discuss their caste identity due to that stigma and fear about how they'll be perceived or whether or not they might be discriminated against. There's also a risk of overlooking intra-community discrimination. So we might look at a South Asian family and see that they're embedded in a South Asian community, and we might see this as a source of belonging and of community support. We might overlook the possibility that families might be experiencing discrimination within their own community due to their caste. As social workers, we also lack awareness and training, and I think that was reflected in the Slido at the beginning. I know that for myself personally, in all my years of practice, this isn't something that's come up in training, and that means that we as social workers lack awareness and knowledge about where casteism might be happening and how we can address it. Also, service design may unintentionally replicate dominant caste bias. So a service is more likely to assume the norms, the behaviours, the rituals from the dominant caste, meaning that those from lower castes who don't share them might feel excluded or marginalised. So some of the barriers that we might come up against as social workers for inclusive practice. So as already discussed, there's a lack of mandatory training on caste and intracultural discrimination, which means that we lack the awareness and knowledge of how to respond. Casteism is also hidden under cultural practices, and this means that we might not recognise it as discrimination. We also need to balance cultural respect with safeguarding duties. So some discriminatory behaviours might be framed as cultural traditions. So for example, caste-based roles or exclusion from rituals or public spaces. And we might hesitate as social workers to intervene out of fear of appearing disrespectful or culturally ignorant, even when rights are being violated. Also, there are few institutional policies addressing caste discrimination. So, for example, the social work response to caste discrimination is not embedded in local authority processes and procedures. There are also gaps in policy and in legislation that it's important to be mindful of. So the Equality Act currently does not explicitly protect caste. So Section 9 originally included a clause that noted caste as an aspect of race. However, this was never enacted. The government was consulted in 2017 if caste should be included as a protective characteristic, but they decided not to legislate further, leaving that current gap. An Employment Appeal Tribunal in 2014 did find ethnic origin protection can cover caste-based workplace discrimination, but again, it's not obvious and it's not really present in our legislation and our policies.
If we think about legislative action, so one way to create change would be to enforce and expand existing anti-discrimination laws to include caste as a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. Another way might be thinking about public awareness campaigns, so launching educational campaigns to raise awareness about caste discrimination and making links and drawing parallels to racism just to really get across and highlight the severity of the issue. Support systems can be really crucial, having robust support groups and helplines for victims of caste-based discrimination, making sure there's legal assistance offered if necessary, and also things that can help individuals such as counselling and mental health services. When we think about diversity training, one way to kind of accelerate change would be to really focusing on inclusion in diversity training. So doing this by incorporating discussions of caste discrimination into the diversity and inclusion training programs in workplaces, schools and public institutions. And in terms of just the monitoring and the research, regular research and surveys are needed to monitor the prevalence of caste-based discrimination and evaluate the effectiveness of any interventions that have been put in place. I suppose what I'd like to highlight is, that importance of reflection, as you've been trained on your sort of social work journey through Frontline, thinking about your own social graces, your own life experiences and how that might affect your personal biases in relation to caste-based discrimination. But alongside that kind of internal focus and the focus on the individual, also think about the systems that you're a part of, the organizations that you work for and the sort of wider community and society and what biases might exist there. And do make sure, if you get the opportunity to push and support for policy reforms and advocate, when there are those needs and opportunities there to do that. So just to sort of wrap up what we've talked about today, we talked about casteism not just being a social issue and talked about how deeply entrenched it is. And it's something that affects millions of individuals and communities and really shapes their lives in deep and profound ways. And what we wanted is by discussing casteism, we start to create that platform for awareness and understanding of actually how far-reaching those consequences can be. And hopefully these conversations help to illuminate those everyday realities faced by people who are impacted by caste discrimination and help to create empathy and solidarity. We're hoping that dialogue allows us to really stand up to and confront the biases and prejudices that do exist within our society. And we want to encourage individuals to question their own beliefs, their own biases, and those sort of wider structures that uphold inequality. And addressing casteism is essential for dismantling the systems that perpetuate discrimination. And to do that, we need to be collective, take action. And this might be through education, policy change, or grassroots movements. And by advocating for justice and equity, we can challenge the status quo and start to work towards a future where every individual, regardless of their caste, has that equity and those equal opportunities to thrive. And by having these discussions about casteism, it also empowers marginalised voices and gives them the platform to share stories and experiences. So this raises awareness, but it also hopefully inspires others to join that movement for change. And through that kind of sustained conversation and action, we can start to create the path for a more inclusive and equitable society, free from this kind of caste-based discrimination.
Hi, Julian. I think I was giving some thought to this in terms of how would I invite someone to talk about their experience of caste. When I was a part of Frontline, I did my undergrad on how do I actively be anti-racist and anti-racist social worker. And I think that's always been with me. Am I doing my best? And can I do my best practice when I'm supporting other people? And I still didn't even consider casteism at that point. I did come across a tool called the culturegram, which does look at different aspects of any person's life. It could be global majority or it could be a white person. And it does kind of look at their status, their caste, their experience of racism. And I think now, looking back, I would probably name, knowing this now about caste, I would probably name the elephant in the room and ask them that how does their caste impact them in society, in their family, as we do know that it impacts people from South Asian communities, people that are from African descent and from Eastern communities. I think I would be a lot more professionally curious and kind of naming it to get more information and enrich my assessments and my understanding from the family's lived experience.
And did that sort of change in approach come from the dissertation and it's a culturegram, did you say?
Yeah, the culturegram, like I said, it's readily accessible on, you can find it. I think it's Congress 1995. You can see toolkits. You can find them on the internet. Yeah, I think that's kind of come from the fact that, and how I would probably personally want someone to ask me about my caste or my relationship with my culture is probably just naming it rather than assuming or trying to get someone. And I think a lot of people don't have a name to it as well. So kind of saying, how does your culture impact you? How do you fit within your society? Probably would be helpful so that people had a better understanding.
Great, thank you.